In 1912, an unknown writer named Edgar Rice Burroughs, at the age of 37, made his debut with novels about Tarzan and John Carter. Tarzan, of course, is an interesting character, but today we are going to talk about John Carter. His story is much richer and far more unique. The very first novel, titled A Princess of Mars, was received so warmly by readers that the author went on to publish 10 more sequels. And it took 100 years before John Carter finally made it to the big screen. The film was released in 2012 and ultimately became a curse for Disney. It was a spectacular box office failure. All of the studio's plans to create its own cinematic universe remain nothing more than dreams. Most believe that John Carter failed because of its screenwriter and director, Andrew Stanton. His vision and his departures from the original novel clashed with what audiences expected. They wanted a faithful adaptation and instead got something very different. In this video, I will not be searching for the reasons behind the failure, because in my personal opinion, the film is much greater than the book. Andrew Stanton, using only the core idea of the original, managed to create something new and truly astonishing. Something that unfortunately most people simply weren't ready for. Still, he skipped over a crucial part of the story, the foundation on which the religion of the Thorns was built. And that is the most important aspect of the narrative. We could have understood the motives of the Thorns. They rule and control 9 systems, including our solar system. Yet somehow their power on Earth collapsed. 2000 years ago, the Thorns arrived on Earth with their Messiah, a young woman named Jesus. She is the central deity of Barsoom, the goddess Issa. But for reasons that I will explain later in this video, humans crucified 3 servants of the Thorns, while the girl was sealed inside a cave. Using the power of the 9th ray, she was able to escape. In the books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Isus is also the main antagonist, but Andrew Stanton's idea moved part of the Thorns story to Earth, something that never happens in the novels. Even at the beginning of the film, when John Carter kills one of their servants, that episode doesn't exist in the book. And there are many more such differences. So today, let's take a closer look at the film John Carter, its story, and the details that only readers of the books might have truly understood. We'll explore the traditions of the Tharks and why Carter suddenly begins to be called Dotar Sojat. We will also take a look at 22 minutes of deleted material that never made it into the final cut. My name is Evgeny. I promise it's going to be interesting. Let's begin. Guys, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the channel. I live in a frontline city where power outages happen often, and working can be really challenging. But your support is what keeps this channel alive and helps me keep creating videos for you. Every contribution is not just support for the channel. It's a real motivation for me to keep going and not give up. It might seem small to you, but for me it means the world and shows that what I do truly matters.
Дуже вам велике дякую за підтримку.
If you'd like to help the channel grow, you can support me on Patreon, via PayPal, or by becoming a channel member. Any support means so much to me. Thank you. So this video will be divided into 3 parts, each connected to the other. The first one will be called The Foundation, the very base on which the story of the film John Carter is built. Disney had long dreamed of creating a large-scale cinematic universe, something in their vision on the same level as Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings. That's why the studio allocated a staggering budget of about $275 million for the first film. At the beginning, Steven Spielberg was expected to direct, but he ultimately declined. That's when Disney turned to Andrew Stanton, who at the time was considered highly promising. His animated films, Wall-E, Finding Nemo, and Cars were all major box office successes. The studio believed so strongly in Andrew and in the success of the future film that, in addition to giving him an enormous budget, they also granted him complete creative freedom. They even asked him to lay out the story framework for 2 planned sequels. Disney's plan was to make 3 films, connected by one overarching story. That's why the ending of the first film was left open. We saw John discovering a way to return to Barsoom, and now I want to tell you about what the beginning of the second film was supposed to look like. From it, we would have learned the story of the Thorns on Earth. Just like the first film, it would have started with a brief history of a planet, only this time, not Mars, but Earth. About 2000 years ago, people witnessed a strange celestial phenomenon that foretold the coming of the Therns. A bright blue light appeared in the sky, like a star, only much brighter than any other. A blue beam descended from the heavens onto the surface of the earth, and along that beam came 3 servants and their goddess, Isa, shortened from the name Jesus. They came to humanity to oversee its development and to deliver their own truth. Long ago, these visitors gave people religion, knowledge, and sacred scripture, and humanity was expected to strictly follow the covenant. The plan of the goddess Isa was to enslave mankind through religion. This method of control had already worked well on Mars, and this time the Therns believed everything was going according to plan. In the books, this race of white beings is called the Therns. Over the centuries, they descended into cannibalism and became completely bald, which forced them to wear wigs. The reason for their cannibalism in the novel has no real logic. Their reasoning is rather foolish. You humans eat the meat of lesser animals, so do we. What difference does it make what kind of flesh is consumed? In the film, this idea was intended to be corrected. The ideology of the Therns is simple. They harvest. Each planet is in reality a farm, and people are nothing more than biological material from which the Therns extract a special substance, a nectar that rejuvenates the body and prolongs their lives. The film hints at this concept, particularly in the dialogue between Carter and the priest Matai Shang.
We don't cause the destruction of a world, Captain Carter. We simply manage it. Feed off it, if you like.
This very idea would later appear in the film Jupiter Ascending. But let us return to the story, to the planet Earth, or as it is called in the novel and in the film, Barsoom. Somehow, people discovered the true purpose of the goddess Isa and decided to resist her philosophy and teachings, since Isa's power was nothing but deception. Her real goal was enslavement and harvest. The priests, those 3 who served the goddess, were executed, crucified outside the city of Jerusalem. The goddess herself, however, possessed the power of the 9th ray and managed to hide in a cave near the hill of Golgotha. People sealed the entrance with a massive stone boulder, but 3 days later, when the cave was opened, to their surprise, she was gone. At the center of the cave stood a stone monument. On its surface was carved a strange symbol, from which 9 rays spread outward. We were shown a very similar cave at the beginning of the first film. Through those corridors, the Therns traveled in ancient times, spatial gates, but in order to use them, one needs the medallion. It contains the concentrated power of the 9th ray, and the portal itself works in a rather peculiar way. If you open the path from within the cave, you are transported to an unknown location. But if, on the contrary, you use the medallion at any location on Mars, you are transported back into the cave. There are plenty of such oddities in the film. Later, I will try to explain how this entire mechanism is supposed to work. I had hoped this would be revealed in the second film, but unfortunately, no continuation should be expected. As a result, the goddess Isa was still able to create a religion known to us as Christianity. After that first defeat, the Therns repeatedly visited Earth, performed miracles, and aided the development of religion. Later, the priests eventually found people who accepted their religious and philosophical teachings. A secret organization was formed, one that carried out all the orders of the Therns. It became known as the Secret Society of the Illuminati. These people served the goddess and directed the historical process of humanity in ways that benefited the Therns. But the history of the planet Barsoom is far richer. Long before the Red Men, there existed a highly advanced and powerful civilization of white men. The surface of Mars was once very similar to Earth. It was covered with oceans, seas, and rivers. There were forests and vegetation everywhere. But after the arrival of the Therns, this entire world was destroyed as the goddess Isa succeeded in carrying out her harvest on Barsoom. Afterward, using the DNA of different peoples of the planet, the Red Race was created. They inhabit the cities of Helium and Zodanga. This is the dominant race on Mars, the most cultured and technologically advanced. All the peoples of Barsoom, including the Green Tharks, enjoy an impressive lifespan, over 1,000 years. Few, however, live to reach such an age because of endless wars, attacks by white apes, and deadly diseases. But still, those who do reach the age of 1,000 are required to go on a pilgrimage along the river Ice, the only river on the planet's surface. According to their religion, at the end of the journey, the pilgrims would meet the goddess Isa, and she would take the faithful into her embrace. But in reality, at the source of the river lived the Therns. Everyone who arrived there was either killed, so their bodies could be used to produce the nectar, or enslaved. The Therns made sure that no one could ever return and reveal the truth. The religion glorifies the Therns. They are the priests of the goddess.
Thorns are holy messengers of the goddess. In the time of oceans, they walked among us, guiding us.
The Therns are constant deceivers. They love to play with humans, whom they see as foolish beings, unworthy of eternal life and the power of the ninth ray.
The ninth ray must remain in the hands of mindless brutes we can control.
This becomes even clearer when the High Priest reveals his motives to John Carter. At times he speaks the truth, but when Carter asks questions, he answers with lies.
You're a Thern.
Therns are a myth.
So what is your cause?
We have none. We're not haunted by mortality, as you are. We are eternal.
I don't understand. Why not just kill me, kill Deja?
We've been playing this game since before the birth of this planet, and will continue to do so long after the death of yours.
This dialogue is one of the most fascinating parts of the film, and after watching it, one gets the impression that the movie would have worked better as pure science fiction, with all the moments of humor removed, although most of the unnecessary scenes were cut during post-production. Because of the vast amount of information contained in the novels, the film chose to skip over explanations of many details. Now I move on to the second part of this video, the explanation. So let's begin. At the very start of the film, we are shown Mars and a strange map. The thing is, by the late 19th century, telescopes were already powerful enough to observe the surface of Mars, but the image was still blurry and created optical illusions. Astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli believed that the long lines visible on the planet's surface were ancient, dried-up riverbeds and Martian canals. Perhaps some of them had even been built by an ancient intelligent civilization that once inhabited Mars. The rivers and canals had dried up due to climate change. Later, it was discovered that this was nothing more than an optical illusion. But Edgar Rice Burroughs took this very idea and the map itself as the foundation when creating the world of Barsoom. Wherever the lines intersected, he placed cities, and at those intersections, deep beneath the ground, underground rivers still flowed. The inhabitants of those cities had access to water. They drilled wells deep into the planet and discovered vast underground reservoirs. In the film, we are shown only 2 cities and 1 Thark settlement, but in reality, Barsoom is home to many cities, as well as many different races. The most numerous are the Red Men, who live in their own nation, where Helium and Zodanga stand as the 2 rival cities. But there are also the settlements of Tarth, Kaol, Tunol, and Fundal. The Yellow Men inhabit only the Arctic regions of Mars. The climate there is cold, and their cities, Kadabra, Lothar, and Marentina, are built beneath enormous glass domes, essentially giant greenhouses. Inside, the climate is controlled, allowing trees and all kinds of tropical plants to grow. This race possesses powerful magnetic traps, fueled by the magnetic field of Mars. Any airships that are caught in a sandstorm and drift too close are pulled in by these magnets. The entire crew is killed, and the ships are taken, later used for their own purposes. That is why the fleets of the Red Men always avoid these settlements. There are also 2 hidden nations of white men. The first are the Orovars. They are the descendants of the highly advanced civilization that once ruled Mars. All of the abandoned buildings and architecture are the remnants of that civilization, which dominated Barsoom before the harvest and before the complete drying up of the oceans and seas on the planet. The Orovars live in a single city, Horts, which in the wider world is believed to be long extinct. Its inhabitants keep their existence secret. Any outsiders who accidentally wander into the city are executed in the arena. The second group of white men are the Lotharians, who live in the invisible city of Lothar. In reality, they perfected their telepathic abilities to such an extent that they can project illusions into the minds of travelers passing by, making them see nothing but abandoned ruins. The firstborn Martians are fierce pirates who inhabit the shores of the underground Sea of Koros at the southern pole in the city of Kamtol. These pirates are ruthless thieves and killers. They live in a totalitarian state where all citizens wear collars around their necks. If anyone attempts to escape, the collar inflicts unbearable pain, and eventually the fugitive dies. And beyond them come the non-humanoid races, the Woola, the Hormads, and the Tharks. I want to pause on the Tharks because these were the very beings John Carter first encountered on Mars, and he witnessed a very rare event, the hatching of their young. This happens only once every 5 years. The Tharks place their eggs into an incubator, where, nourished by the energy of the sun, they grow. On a strictly appointed day, a group led by the chief, known as the Jedak, arrives to collect all the hatchlings. Any eggs that have not opened by that time are destroyed. All the newborns are then released to the women, who fight one another to catch and claim as many of the infants as possible. These brutal struggles often result in many Thark women being killed in the process. The Tharks are extremely cruel and unemotional. They have no families, no concept of private property. Privileges and possessions are distributed strictly by hierarchy. A chief does not inherit his position. He wins it by defeating his predecessor in combat. The Green Martians do make use of certain technological achievements, such as everlasting lamps or firearms, but these innovations were stolen from the Red Martians. The Tharks wage an eternal war with them. Their primary weapon is the musket, which fires explosive projectiles. Each of these shells contains a substance based on radium, powerful enough to burn straight through metal. That is why the sky fleets of Helium and Zodanga always try to steer clear of Thark settlements. One of the main traditions of the Green Martians is single combat, duels fought one-on-one. No one is allowed to interfere, and these battles always end with the death of the loser. The victor claims everything that belonged to the defeated, personal belongings, clothing, and even his name. This moment is described vividly in the book. In such a duel, John Carter killed the young leader, Dotar Sojat, with a single strike.
You killed him with one blow.
After this, the Jedak Tarkas allowed Carter to use the name Dotar Sojat. In the film, however, this moment was never explained, nor was it shown how Carter learned the Martian language. In the book, it was very different. For a long time, the Virginian studied individual words on his own, and since he already knew many Earth languages, learning Martian was not difficult for him. In the film, however, Sola gives him a special liquid made from white moss. It allows for the opening of a telepathic link. This is the method the Tharks use to quickly teach all their children, but in this case, Sola transferred to Carter the knowledge of her people's language. By the way, on Barsoom there is only one language, shared by all nations and races of the planet. The yellowish white moss is one of the plants that grows everywhere on Mars. From it, the Tharks produce a healing elixir. If applied to a wound, it seals and heals within hours. In one deleted scene, this very ointment is applied to Carter's wound by the Jedak, and it heals instantly. That is why even mortal injuries, which on Earth would mean certain death, can be cured on Barsoom with just a single dose of this elixir. The Tharks are a nomadic people. They settle among the ruins of ancient cities. They are so primitive that they cannot read, cannot write, and cannot build their own dwellings. Another important detail, one that was not shown in the film, is the atmosphere and air on Mars. It is artificially created by terraforming machines. A massive structure with lenses mounted on its roof captures and directs the power of the ninth ray from the sun into enormous reservoirs. The mechanism then processes it, mixing the ninth ray with the cosmic ether. The result is breathable air on Mars. Another key element is the journey of Carter, Deja, and Sola to the source of the river Is, where they encountered a strange structure. First of all, it is clear that this structure was built during the era of the ancient civilization, because an identical mechanism is depicted in the Temple of the Tharks. But what is it, and how does it work? The film never explained. In fact, it is a massive portal, a galactic vessel, similar to the caves that existed on Earth. Only the caves could enable teleportation between planets, but this construction allowed the goddess Isa to travel between entire systems under her control. When Carter accidentally steps onto the beam, an entire solar system appears before him, with 9 planets visible and a brief instruction. Specific words to be spoken in order to travel to one planet or another. And let me say right away, in this cinematic universe, all 9 planets of the solar system were once inhabited by humans, but only 3 remain alive today: Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. Yes, in this fantastic world, Jupiter was home to what were called the skeletons of Jupiter. They were no different from ordinary humans, except for the color of their skin. It was bright blue. By the way, when the goddess Isa is finally killed, Barsoom will become a target for Jupiter, since the blue men will want to enslave Mars. And because Barsoom will have lost its main protection, the Therns, it will now be an easy target for other, more advanced planets. Another element poorly developed in the film is the process of teleportation. To be more precise, it is not really a jump through space, but rather the creation of a copy of the organism indistinguishable from the original. John Carter essentially recreated himself on Mars, while his body remained lying in the cave. At the end of the first book, Carter is killed, and he awakens on Earth. And when he travels back to Barsoom for the second time, he creates yet another new body for himself. But the Thorns do this in a completely different way. And again, since this idea was added only in the film, in the novels it was enough simply to enter the cave in order to fall through to Mars. How this mechanism truly works, I cannot answer. In my opinion, the screenwriters did not work through certain details well and simply chose to skip the explanation. But what do you think? Write your thoughts in the comments. And finally, before closing the second part of this video, I would like to talk about the film's ending, specifically the credits, which actually contain a lot of information about the Thorns and Earth. At first glance, there is nothing unusual. We are shown a map of Mars, but it is an ancient map, complete with seas and oceans. Then we see Carter discovering the presence of the Thorns in Arizona. Later, we are shown Jerusalem and the star that foretold the coming of the goddess Isa. After that, the images shift to ancient Egypt, where the Thorn medallion can be seen, then to the Mayan civilization. And in Carter's office, we notice evidence that in Mesopotamia, India, and many other places, he found traces of the Thorns' influence on humanity. In Andrew Stanton's drafts, there is a great deal of fascinating information, yet nowhere does it say who exactly populated the planets with humans. Only that after her arrival, the goddess Isa would leave 3 of her servants behind on each farm to oversee the process of development, the so-called Holy Trinity. They performed miracles for ancient peoples, taught them, and gave them religion. This was the primary method of Thorn control, and perhaps the most effective one. When making the film, Andrew Stanton was uncertain which direction to take. That is why, by the end of production, it was decided to cut 22 minutes of filmed material. Now I move on to the third part of this video, deleted scenes. In truth, there is nothing particularly important in these deleted scenes, aside from a few moments. The first minutes of the film were originally meant to begin with Deja Thoris telling the story of the war between Helium and Zodanga. She was also meant to demonstrate her invention, the discovery of the 9th ray. Later, it was decided to cut unnecessary humor. For example, John Carter drinking urine, or Deja refusing food but then eating one's solar leaves, or the mocking of young Edgar for supposedly being related to Carter, and many other moments. However, Carter's escape could have been kept, because in that very scene, Tars Tarkas reveals that Sola is his daughter, a secret he tried hard to protect. When Tars Tarkas was young, he fell in love with a Thark woman named Gozava. But love and family are forbidden among the Tharks. Such a violation of the law meant execution. Later, his beloved secretly hid an egg, from which Sola was born. When the Tharks discovered this, they tortured Gozava to learn who the father was, but she never said a word. In the end, she was killed. Tars Tarkas then did everything he could to become Jeddak in order to protect the secret and Sola's life. The dialogue between Carter and the priest was also shortened, but there was nothing truly vital in it. So in fairness, I must say, all of these 22 minutes that were left out of the final cut do not affect the overall narrative or the plot in any meaningful way. John Carter ranks 10th on the list of the most expensive films in cinema history. There has been endless debate and criticism, with some arguing that Andrew Stanton only showed 10% of the book, leaving the rest for audiences who never read the novel to imagine for themselves. In some places, critics are right. It is always difficult, though not impossible, to adapt a book to the screen. Personally, I believe the film strayed far from the original, and I am glad it did. 100 years had passed since the novel was written, and many of its elements would have looked extremely silly on modern screens. Secondly, many of Edgar Rice Burroughs' ideas had already been borrowed by George Lucas for Star Wars. That is why lightsaber-like scenes were eventually cut. Films like Stargate, Prometheus, Riddick, and many others also use Burroughs' ideas. But what do you think about the film? Did you like it or not? And was it the right decision to use the religion of the Therns, showing that they had once been on Earth and so on? Was Andrew Stanton right to expand the influence of the goddess Isa? Write your thoughts in the comments.